You guys had the trucker protest.
Yes, we did.
That is like your biggest protest I think Canada's probably ever seen.
Probably, yeah.
Probably. I'm not Canadian. I don't know Canadian history, but that's just for the sake of argument, at least in the past few decades, the biggest thing they ever seen. Now, they were protesting to catch people up there, protesting the vaccine mandates. Not vaccines themselves, the mandates.
Yes.
Now, what they did is they took their trucks, they went to the capital city, and they pretty much just put a halt to everything.
Yes.
Now, that was a peaceful protest. That was the definition of a peaceful protest. Amazing how there was no violence. Now, another thing that kind of goes to the wayside here in the States, or maybe even up there in Canada, a lot of the truckers were vaccinated. A lot of them were vaccinated. They just didn't like the mandates, the government overreach. So what did Trudeau do? I used to like Trudeau. He froze their bank accounts and the bank accounts of their families on a peaceful protest. That, to me, is more disgusting than anything that happened in the United States protest. That is true authoritarianism. That is almost true fascism. Because we can't even say this fascism because they were getting a lot of pressure from the Biden administration because their protests caused us economic problems. So Biden and the government is making phone calls saying, end this now. It's about money. So what's your take as a cop from that protest and the government response?
I think the issue there is we weren't talking just, like your average Joe, the truck driver who took his truck and drove, from British Columbia, like all the way to Ottawa, which is like 10-day drive. It's, and camped out. The issue there, I understand, was that the money was coming from other places, as opposed to like just Joe average, just protesting, doing his thing. And so this went on, and they just they locked down the city. And eventually it's like, okay, we've got to get rid of this because it was gaining far too much momentum, like the impact on the economies. Like you say, it wasn't just Ottawa. It was, the rest of the country, our supply chains, and then, down to the States. It was just causing a lot of trouble.
That was the point. That was the point of the protest.
Yeah.
Right?
But the only way, and again, if it was just, Joe, the truck driver, whose personal views were that this is a bad thing, that's one thing. But I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be able to, keep my truck running 24 hours a day. It's a lot of gas, and keep myself warm because Ottawa is pretty cold in the wintertime and all that sort of stuff for any great length of time. So the money was coming from somewhere else. So what they're saying is,
so like Americans, for example, were giving to GoFundMes, right? And the government halted those, right?
Yeah.
Which, if the company wants to make a decision, that's a different thing. But I'm saying like the actual bank accounts, like I bank with TD Bank. The government froze their accounts. That's not related to money coming in, the money they already have. So if they're at the protest and their wife wants to go buy a soda at 7-Eleven, their bank account's frozen. You don't think that's a huge government overreach for a peaceful protest?
It stopped. It's interesting because the perception kind of for the people in Ottawa was not perceived as peaceful at all.
No,
it wasn't like riots
honking horns.
Well, if they're doing it for 3 weeks straight,
it's annoying. Right? It's definitely annoying.
And people couldn't leave their houses. They couldn't get out. They couldn't. It was a lot more inconvenient. No, they weren't burning stuff down.
Right.
But, I don't know, when you're setting up hot tubs and things like that, it's a little bit different from,
they had hot tubs.
Yeah. Yeah. And trying to weigh sort of the community safety, community standards. Some of the things that came up were, had this been other communities having protests, how long would it last before the police would have shut them down?
Right.
But probably.
Who are the police to shut down a peaceful protest? Like can't Canadian protest rights might be a little different than here in the States, but protesting is supposed to be protected under our First Amendment. I know you guys are a little bit different.
Yeah, as long as it's peaceful, that's fine.
From American perspective, that is the definition of what a protest should be. That is the correct way to protest. Now we could debate why they were protesting, but that's not the point. The point is, this was a peaceful, by definition, protest. This was the correct way to protest, whether you agree with what they're protesting or not. You don't have to agree with what they're protesting. You got to agree, though, how they're protesting is the correct way to do it. For the most, generally. I'm sure you can find a few examples here and there. And yet the government calling them racist and deplorables, which they weren't. There's truck drivers. There's working people, average people. Sure, so there's some weirdos.
Well, it turns out that a lot of them were associated with white supremacist organizations. So again, it wasn't like Joe the construction drivers and his truck. There was a lot of layers of criminality, I believe, beneath the surface.
Okay.
And so that's what changed the dynamic a bit.
So for the sake of argument, I've heard that's not true. But for the sake of argument, that's true. They also have a right to protest.
Yeah.
So you don't have to agree with. I would if that's true. Yeah, their ideas are deplorable, completely, but they still have a right to protest. The Nazis marched on Washington as a peaceful protest. Fuck them, but they have a right to do that.
Right.
Trudeau, man, it's really concerning because that's so close to our borders. That kind of they can just freeze your money. That's terrifying. They're not going to protest ever again. So what would have been the right way to protest then? If not that, what would have been the right way to protest?
I think the protest was going fine. It should have been shut down sooner.
Or maybe the government should have just lifted their mandates then. Right? This comes down to the government. From my opinion, you should be more mad at the government than the people protesting. If the government needs to fix it, then the government needs to take action, not just shut it down, just change their policies. If it's that much of an economic problem, then maybe they rethink their policies. They're in power. They're the ones in control.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. All right, Desmond, I'll let you off the hook. Let's talk.